Okay, everybody, so this will be a general review of what we covered in Unit 4, and this can be turned in both as an assignment as well as a way to kind of review topics that were covered on previous homework, so you can turn in some missing assignments or even your project. So, to start with here, Unit 4 was all about systems of equations, which we learned to solve by hand using either what's called substitution or the elimination method. And then when we got into word problems, we learned that the easiest way to do that would be by graphing them in Desmos and looking for where the lines intersect. So the two by hand here, and then the rest can be solved using Desmos. Substitution, you'll usually see one case where you have a single variable like y. And what you're going to do is take what y is equal to and substitute it where you see y in your other equation. So what this would look like would be negative 3x minus 2, but instead of writing y, we would substitute in 5x minus 7, and then that would be equal to negative 12. So now we're only dealing with the variable x, there's no more y involved, and to finish this up, we'd have to distribute, combine like terms, and solve for x. So by distributing here, what this looks like next is negative 3x minus 10x plus 14 equals negative 12. Now, we want to combine some like terms. We don't want to just start moving stuff around yet. This combines to negative 13x plus 14 equals negative 12. And if you were to subtract 14, you'll see that negative 13x equals negative 26. And dividing by negative 13 gives you an answer of 2 for x. So again, substitution requires a lot of just arithmetic and algebraic skill. Once you have an answer, this part's easy, because then once you know what x is equal to, you would just take one of these two equations. I would take, in this case, the top one. It looks easier to work with, and plug x's value into it. And by substituting in that value of 2, we are going to end up with 10 minus 7, or 3 for y. All right, so your final answer would be x is 2 and y is 3. And sometimes that answer is given as an ordered pair 2, 3. It depends on what you're asked to find or the context of the question. But this would be okay for us. All right, so now we're going to look at solving by elimination, which is another way you learn to solve by hand. And here we go. So for number 2, elimination is the idea where you multiply each row by a number. And the way we learned that would be you want to have one negative and one positive for x or for y, which we do in this case. So you could have answered this in one of two ways. What we learned to do was to take the number in front of this x and multiply everything by that number in the top row. And since 6 is in front of that x, you would multiply everything in this row by 6 if you wanted to eliminate x. Now, you could have done the same for y, but with different numbers. If you wanted to get rid of y, you could have done, all right, there's a 5 here. And since we have a negative and a positive, I could have multiplied all of that by 5. And since there's a 2 in front here, multiplied all of that by 2, and that would have eliminated y. So it's up to you. If you want to get rid of y, if you want to get rid of x, it's totally your call. Let's just stick with x because that's what we initially had written. And again, you got to distribute, so be careful. You're doing 12 times every single one of these, including what's on the other side of the equal sign. So that would become 72x minus 60y equals 96. And our next row would be, if we distribute here, negative 72x. So again, you always want to make sure one's negative and positive to start with. If it wasn't, you would have had to, like if this was positive 12, you would have had to have multiplied by negative 6 to make sure they cancel. But I believe I've designed them in such a way that you won't have to worry about that. All right, so we have negative 72x plus 12y, and then 6 times 0, well, that's just 0. So if we combine these, because elimination is to do this step first. The second step is to add the two rows, the new ones. So we're going to add these. X is going to cancel, and we're going to be left with negative 48y equals 96. Now, solving for y here, we just divide by negative 48, and we get an answer of negative 2 for y. So a little bit more work than substitution. Some people are better at this. That's just something you're familiar with, and they do very well with it. So that's how you could solve that. Now, again, just like last time, we have to pick a row and plug in negative 2 for y to answer for x. So the third step, and again, this is your call. Whatever you think will be an easier row to plug into. You could pick row 1, you could pick row 2. Mainly, I'll pick row 1. We're going to make sure we plug in and accurately combine like terms and solve. So I'm going to substitute that value of negative 2, because that's what y was equal to. This becomes 6x plus 10 equals 8. Subtracting 10 gives us 6x equals negative 2. And dividing by 6 gives you an answer of negative 0.3 repeating, or negative 1/3. All right. So that is how we could do elimination. All right. Now, in a separate video, I will talk to you about how to do our word problems using Desmos.